Hello and welcome to LionWing Talks, a weekly show about, well, all things LionWing. I'm your host, Bradley Hailstorm. I just happen to be the founder and president of LionWing, and this show is really dedicated to you all, the community. It's a show where you ask questions and I answer them. I also give you updates on our projects and talk about what we've got going on in the future. So, throughout the week, I usually ask folks to drop us some questions or drop us some feedback or comments, be it in the Discord, on one of our Kickstarter campaign pages, through social, what have you. And I utilize that information, those questions, those comments to talk about various topics as they pertain to our games and it pertains to LionWing. And this is episode 4. So we've been doing this for 4 weeks now. We've had some good feedback on it thus far, and I'm really excited about what we've got on the docket today. So I've got a lot of questions today, more questions than I was anticipating. Our previous Kickstarter campaign just ended a week ago for Embryo Machine. So Embryo Machine ran on Kickstarter for about 2.5 weeks. We successfully funded at something like 350% of our ask, which was awesome. Embryo Machine actually was our highest ask that we've had thus far. Most of our games, not counting Testament because we didn't run that campaign, most of our campaigns hover around the $10,000 base funding mark, but this was a bit more. It was 15,000, and it's a bigger game. It's a heavier game. There's more going on in the game component wise, and so therefore the ask had to be a little bit bigger. And yet we still knocked it out of the park, coming in at basically $52,000. So thank you to everyone who checked out Embryo Machine, who pledged your support and spread the word about the game. Honestly, these campaigns, they happen because of all of you. I mean, without you all showing your enthusiasm and then showing your support for our products, LionWing wouldn't exist and the campaign certainly wouldn't exist. So Embryo Machine was a big success. I think people were a little doubtful about its success earlier on. It is a pretty niche product. It's a mecha game. It's one that doesn't really fit cleanly into any one genre. It's part battle card game, part war game, doesn't use miniatures, uses standees. I mean, there's a lot of things that can get in the way of people wanting to check it out, and yet y'all showed up and we made it a huge success. We knocked out all of our stretch goals. We hit every single stretch goal. We even added one sort of at the last minute just because, the last 2 days of any campaign is just crazy. And that was the case with Embryo Machine this time as well. The last 24 hours especially, were pretty astronomical. I think we went up like $10,000 just in the last 18 hours. And so we threw in a stretch goal right there at the last minute. We had been wondering if that was going to happen, so it's not like we were caught completely unprepared. We had talked about, hey, what happens if? I don't necessarily know if we were confident that we were going to go there, but it became very apparent in the closing hours, like, oh yeah, we're going there. In fact, the last 4 hours of the campaign were pretty insane. It's funny, all of our campaigns have performed really well, and this isn't like totally unusual for any campaign. It's not like we're some special company with special products that are breaking the mold and performing outside Kickstarter norms, but all of our games, they do really well in the first 48 hours, and the final 48 hours do really well as well. But especially in the last 24 hours, that was the case with Rod Hunt Festival, it was the case with Gun and Gun, and it was the case again with Embryo Machine. So thanks everyone, seriously, for checking out the game and for making it the success that it is. Now, the real work starts on our end. Prepping a game for Kickstarter is a challenge in and of itself. But what comes after the Kickstarter is equally challenging, and dare I say even more challenging. With putting your product out there in such a public way through a Kickstarter, you get a lot of eyeballs on stuff that you didn't have eyeballs on before. And so you get feedback on things that you, as the team who's worked on this project for a year, hasn't been able to see any longer. It's like if you stare at something so long, you kind of stop seeing that thing. And that's the case with game development, especially in the tabletop market. We've been working on Embryo Machine in some capacity for, I don't know, coming up on a year or so. And when you work on a project for that long and you look at the same text over and over and over, and you look at the components over and over and over, and you look at the layouts over and over and over, and you look at everything over and over and over, you stop seeing things after a while, which is why Kickstarter, I think, is profoundly important for the tabletop industry. I mean, it's profoundly important for so many reasons, but it's especially important for having more folks see your game and offer a little bit of Q&A. Obviously, or not Q&A, I should say, QA. We have our own QA process, and I'd like to think that the QA process is good. But our team is only so big. Our team certainly isn't the 800 people that backed Embryo Machine. You're never going to get a QA team that's 800 people large. And so Kickstarter provides an opportunity to have a giant pool of QAers, in a sense, who are looking at your stuff saying, hey, this reads funny, or actually, I think you missed a word there, or there's a typo there, there's, a misspelling there, what have you. And so it's really great in that regard. So, yeah, Kickstarter is profoundly important in many ways. And yeah, Embryo Machine's campaign was a success. You'll notice that I have been pretty quiet over the past week in the Discord and in updates, which tends to be how I operate after a Kickstarter. I mentioned in last week's show that Kickstarters are really exciting. They're fun. It's such a cool time to be able to interact and engage with folks. You get to converse with folks through the Discord. You get to meet a bunch of new people who come into the Discord from the campaign page. You get to meet a bunch of people through the campaign page itself, through the comments section, or through a direct message. And it's really exciting. It's exhilarating. There's a bit of like an adrenaline dump that happens while a Kickstarter is live. It's just really fun. The level of interactivity is great. And at the same time, Kickstarters are exhausting. I mean, you are on for however long your campaign is running. So for Embryo Machine, we ran just about 2.5 weeks, which is the standard length of all of our Kickstarters. Or at least it's the standard length now. Our first Kickstarter we ran for 35 days. I can't even fathom doing that now. That is just so wild to think that I did that. Nevertheless, our campaigns now are about 2.5 weeks. And so you are on all the time for 2.5 weeks. You're thinking about the game more than you've ever thought about it. You're interacting with people more than you have about that game, more than ever before, obviously, because for the most part, it's the first time you're showing the game to the public in a real, meaningful way. People are asking questions about the game. People are asking questions about the pledge tiers. People are asking questions about shipping. People are asking questions about add-ons. There's a lot of questions that are happening, and you're answering those questions. So you're constantly thinking about the game. You're thinking about the campaign. You're thinking about backers. You're thinking about the things you're offering. You're just constantly thinking about that thing. It becomes sort of all-consuming. I think my wife hates me in some ways. Because of what happens during a Kickstarter. It really takes a lot from you, and it doesn't give you a lot of time to focus your efforts on many other things. I mean, I guess you could be like one of those creators that kind of just puts your thing up there and then you don't really do much with it, or you interact a little bit here and there. But I don't think most people want to be like that. I don't think most people are like that, at least not from the successful campaigns. And certainly I'm not like that. That's just not how I operate. I like to be heavily involved as much as possible. And so someone in the chat just said, is post Kickstarter depression a thing for the project creators? I don't know if it's a thing for project creators at large. I can't speak for everyone, but I can speak for myself. And yes, I think there is sort of a post campaign hangover in many ways. The thing that I liken it to the most, actually, this is going to sound really strange, but nevertheless, it's been my experience. After I remember the day after my wife and I got married, I had this like post-wedding depression. I mean, it didn't last long, but nevertheless, it happened because you put all of your effort into this one thing, and then you have this big moment, and all these people are there, and all these people are around you, and you're sort of the focus of that day or that weekend or whatever the case may be. And Kickstarters are very, very similar. You do all of this prep for a long time. I mean, if you're going to offer a campaign that's successful, you're doing a lot of prep for a long time to make sure that it's going to be a success. So you're in the trenches working for months preparing a Kickstarter. And then the Kickstarter happens. And then the real work begins at that point, because now you're on. Now you're answering for your work. And people are they're putting their hard-earned money into a project, sort of on trust alone, that I'm going to give you my money. That when I give you this money, I can never get this money back. I'm going to give you this money, and I'm going to hope that you're going to do something with it, and you're going to deliver on the promises that you've made in this campaign. And so there's this feeling of needing to deliver. At least there is for me. And so when you stop and recognize that people could be spending this money on anything in their lives, but they're not. They're spending it on your stuff. I don't take that lightly. And so when the campaign is live, I'm in it. And that's all I'm doing. That's all I'm thinking about. That's all I want to do. I will get up in the middle of the night. I mean, I'm not super proud of this, but there have been times when I've woken up out of a dead sleep at 4 a.m. and I roll over, I grab my phone, I go to the campaign page, I check the campaign, and I'm also either answering direct messages or responding to comments there at 4 in the morning, and then I turn the phone off, I go back to sleep. And so that just goes to show, at least for me in LionWing, how, committed we are, how committed you have to be if you want to run successful Kickstarters. And so the last 6 days I've been more quiet than usual because I'm just decompressing a little bit. And I'm having to kind of fight through that post-campaign hangover. And I'm sort of coming to the other side of that. This is typically how it happens. These feelings typically last, at least for me, about a week after a campaign ends. It's kind of a not so fun week, and then I get to the other side, and I'm okay. Then I'm getting to that point now. I think I probably need another day or two, but nevertheless, that has been why I've been more quiet than usual in the Discord, especially. I started to get back into the swing of things yesterday, though. I posted our first update on not Embryo Machine, but actually on one of our other projects, waiting for fulfillment, and that's Karate Wild Hunt Festival. I will be posting updates on Gun and Gun this week, as well as Embryo Machine. So the lull is coming to an end, but nevertheless, this is sort of par for the course, at least for me. I go into it knowing that this is going to happen. I go into it knowing that it's going to be a really, really all-encompassing 2.5 weeks. And then there's going to be this come down period, and then I'm going to stabilize and kind of level out, and things will go back to normal. So I apologize if I haven't been in the Discord as much as I typically am, but I do plan on remedying that going forward. So thanks for hanging in there with me, and thanks for understanding. Kickstarters are not an easy thing to do, They're not. They take a lot from you. They really do. So a couple housekeeping items before we jump into this episode proper. Episode 3 is not yet up on YouTube because I've been having some audio issues with it. In fact, the audio is kind of a mess. It's the very same reason why I've had to restart the show twice now tonight, because in episode 3 I had for whatever reason the audio was coming off as very echoey, or I was sounding a little like tinny, like I was a little bit of a robot. And so it hasn't made for a great show. I've been working on trying to edit that audio to get it to some place that is somewhat presentable, that isn't just going to sound like total shit. But I'm not having a ton of luck. There's also been some weird video issues as well. So, I mean, episode 3 is just kind of a mess. I think what I might do is I might just throw it up there with the disclaimer of, hey, this is going to sound and at some points look like trash. I'm sorry. I think we've fixed it, but please give it a listen if you can sit through it. I mean, it's not so bad to where like you listen to it and you're like, I just can't listen to this anymore. It sounds that horrible. I mean, it sounds bad, but I don't know if it sounds that bad. There was a lot of good content in that episode as well, so I don't want to just not put it up either. So what I'll probably do is throw it up with that disclaimer, and hopefully we don't encounter that issue going forward anymore. Speaking of the episodes, so episodes 1, 2, and 2.5 will be going up in podcast form by the end of the week. So I'm targeting 4 major podcasting platforms. Probably not many outside of that. So that means you will be able to find our stuff on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts, as well as the Podbean app, because Podbean is the place that I'm using to host the podcast in general. So those 4 avenues will be the ones you want to check out if you want to get us in audio form. I'll be doing a little post-production on some of those shows, adding an intro, adding an outro, that kind of thing. But by and large, I'm not doing a ton of like editing of the show itself. There was a time when I did some podcasts in the past where I went, when I was doing the editing myself, and I went back through and I was editing out and I was editing out awkward silences, and those days are behind me. I just don't have the time for that. So the audio might be a little raw, not necessarily in quality, although episode 3's quality is going to be pretty raw. But in terms of what you're hearing is going to be exactly what you hear on stream. So there'll be and there'll be word stumbles and all that stuff, and that makes it authentic. And it also saves me a shit ton of time editing. That is not fun to have to sit down in Audacity and listen and look for every audio break where you think there's an or some kind of issue, especially when you're trying to edit an episode of something that is like 90 minutes long. So nevertheless, they will be going up, and I hope people check them out. I see some more folks have joined us in the chat. Thank you all. Maid, Sin, always nice to see y'all. I don't know if Fusion's still in the chat, but Sai's been with us from the beginning. Thanks everyone for joining. Feel free to comment and ask questions as we go through this. So yeah, that's what's going on housekeeping wise. Let's jump into some questions, because despite the fact that Embryo Machine specifically ended its campaign last week, we're still getting Embryo Machine questions, which is awesome. I love that. I mentioned it in one of the shows that these shows are so much more interesting and they're so much more fun for me, but really more interesting for all of you when we have questions, when there is engagement from the community. I will find a way to talk if no one sends questions. That's just sort of who I am, but it's much more interesting when people are sending me specific questions. So with that said, let's get to it. This one came from the Kickstarter campaign itself, and that is, once printed out to optimal dimensions, how big will the miniatures be? Really hope they'll be bigger than the standard 28 or 32 millimeter miniature typical in tabletop games. After all, these are mechs we're talking here. Yeah, so I've mentioned a couple times on the campaign page, in the Discord, and in our previous shows that we are offering those STL files, those digital files that you can print off, 3D print yourself for the mechs, in two different sizes. One will be a much smaller size so that it fits the scale of the game. So just to reiterate, the battlefields are broken down into squares. It's a grid-based battlefield, and the squares are about 19.05 millimeters across in any direction. And so the bases of the mechs in the smaller version that we're offering have to be able to fit within those size parameters. So those mechs will be considerably smaller. Nevertheless, they will be to scale, and you'll actually be able to play with them and utilize them on the board. That's why we're offering them at that size. Some people will say, wow, that's really small. And yes, it is really small. But if you want to be able to use them and play, they have to be that small. I don't know. I don't know what else to tell you. That's just the size of the game. So they have to be small. However, we also realize that there are some people who also, or even in place of, just want to print off the mechs, and they just want to paint them for their own enjoyment in their free time, or they want to use them as proxies in some other game. And who wants a small mech if you just want to be able to like paint it and show it off? So we are going to be offering a different size. In fact, I was just talking with the 3D artist, the renderer, a few days ago. We're going to be offering something much, much, much bigger than 28 or 32 millimeters. I think we're actually looking at like 70 millimeters. So we're going big. You're not going to have much room in between. I mean, the way that I look at it is, we're giving you the smaller file so that you can use it in the game if you wanted to. But after that, why go like 40 millimeters? You're not going to be able to use that in the game anyway. So let's just go bigger. let's go. We talked 70 to 80 millimeters. There was even a point in the conversation when we both were like 100 millimeters, but that gets a little more challenging because of the polygon count and all that stuff. So I think we're eyeing 70 to 80. So there'll be a pretty good size. I just hit my mic. Sorry about that. I think so. I think people are going to be excited about that. At least I'm excited about that. I think that'll be cool. And again, I'm going to have them in both sizes, of course. Why wouldn't I? It's our game, but there will be something really cool about seeing Hystrix, especially, who's already this just hawking pile of armor in 70 millimeters. I mean, that's just rad. Um, Yes, we can only go bigger. That was pretty much my thinking behind that. Someone said, any info on Embryo Machine solo? So not at this time. I know folks are excited to and interested in seeing what the solo details are. The reason we haven't offered up those solo details yet, which we will be putting the entire solo rulebook online once it's ready to go. But the reason we haven't done that thus far is we're still cleaning it up. So the solo mode started development last fall, September, October, sometime around there. It's a little blurry. Nevertheless, it didn't, just because it started in September, October, didn't necessarily mean that it was then finished in September and October. In fact, the solo mode just finished back in January, and so it took 3 or 4 months for good reason. There's playtesting involved in all of that had to happen on the side of Shikaki-san, who's the game's main designer, and on the side of Kosaic. They had to test the solo mode to ensure that, well, it worked. But then once it's given to us, we then have to go through and we have to translate it. But, translating is not as easy as just, all right, let's translate the rules and then we're done. It's a lot more complicated than that. So we translate the rules and then we edit them so that, oftentimes with the raw translation, it doesn't sound the greatest. It's not really supposed to. That's why you've got localization editors. The localization editor goes in, they do their job, they spruce up the language, they make sure it's readable, they make sure that all of the text matches the Japanese text. And there's a lot of coordination at that point when you're going through the translation process of talking to the original writers, the original designers, to ensure that you've got everything mechanically accurate. But then once you have all that, for us anyway, we then play test it. It's not enough for us to translate and then edit that text so that it reads well. We need to make sure that something wasn't lost in translation that we didn't miss during the translation and editing process. And so we then take it to our team and then we play test it to ensure that everything is working as it does or as it should. Oftentimes, more questions come from the play testing because it's one of those situations of, oh wow, okay, so we edit it to we translated the text and then we edited that text to say this thing. But actually, now that we've played it, the language should probably be a little different. But then once you get into that territory, you then have to go back to say, hold on a second, we're going to tweak this language. This could change things. We now have to consult with the original writers to ensure that our change makes sense with the essence of the thing that we're changing. And so it's a complicated process. So that was a long way to say, yes, development on the solo mode started last fall, but it's still sort of ongoing. We have the skeleton, we have the template in place, but it's not quite ready for prime time yet. We're not ready to present it to our audience. I don't like to present half-baked stuff. Even with Kickstarter, I don't typically like to show assets of our games that haven't been fully kind of edited yet. So it's one of the reasons why we showed off the 3 stretch goal cards, and we only used placeholder text for those cards. So those texts have the text of those new cards, Active Shield and all of that. That text is done and it's been done, but we're still play testing it. And until we've play tested it and made sure that our play testing data reflects what that new text should say, I don't really like to show people what that text is going to be like because I don't want people to get the wrong idea. I also don't want to present something that isn't completely ready to be shown yet because then that looks bad on us. I mean, inevitably we could say it's a work in progress, and we say that all the time, but some people, they'll see that, they won't even care about the work in progress part. They'll see bad wording or elusive text or whatever the case may be, and they'll just assume that is going to be a reflection of the final quality. And it's like, no, like we're still working on this. I promise it's going to be better. So we've done that in the past where we have shown things a little earlier than expected, and I have learned my lesson now not to do that. So that's why we haven't shown off the solo mode just yet. There's no other reason for it other than that. When we do show it off, I want to be able to show it off mostly complete. Now, inevitably, I was saying this earlier, when you get your product in front of 800 backers, they're going to see things that you never saw. Our team is only so big, and it's certainly not 800 people big. And so 800 people are going to see things in a different way. So invariably, we'll put up the solo mode rules, and people will say, yeah, I don't know if that wording makes a lot of sense, or like, what about this? And so we'll go back and tweak things. Again, that's the work in progress part. But what I present in the first place, I really want to be as close to a finished product as I can, knowing that it's not going to be the finished product. But I don't want to present something that looks half-assed either. So hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully that answers your question, Silent Frank. I'm gonna answer some questions here in the chat before getting to my questions in my Google Doc here on my show notes, since people are asking questions, which is cool. How will Gun and Gun Online competitive work? Would it be through Tabletop Simulator or with webcams? Yes, it'll be through webcams. So I mentioned in last week's show, or maybe the week prior to that, I want people to play their games. There's nothing less exciting to me than getting a game and then not being able to play it. And so we're in this weird space during this pandemic era where, we're shipping this competitive card game, and you can't really have competitive card game tournaments, in-person leagues, in-person play. It just can't really happen right now, at least not safely. I mean, certainly there's probably some people out there doing it, and that's cool. More power to you. It's just not what I want to do, and it's not something I necessarily want to promote. If stores, however, who ordered Gun and Gun, they want to run their own leagues, cool, whatever. But we know that there are a lot of people out there who are not ready to do that just yet. And so we want to be able to offer them an opportunity to still play the game in the way that they would have played if the pandemic never happened. And that is through some kind of league. Thus, the LionWing Virtual League is what we're going to be offering, both for Gun and Gun and Embryo Machine and other things in the future. So it will work with webcams, though. There was sort of an internal debate with our team members of, all right, do we just throw it all up on Tabletop Simulator, or do we kind of go the route of webcams? And I think it was like a 50-50 split. I think some people were, hey, let's just do Tabletop Simulator. It's easier. It's probably more streamlined. It's more accessible, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't disagree with any of that. I think that actually is all very true. Then there were some people who said, yeah, but they've got their games. Let's let them use it. And so ultimately it kind of came to me to be the tiebreaker, and I said, no, I want people to play their games. I want people to actually play Gun and Gun with a physical copy, and we're going to do webcams. And it's not as intuitive, and it's not as accessible, and it does take a bit more work to make happen. And if we find out that it takes too much work to happen, we will pivot and we will offer something else. But right now, I really want to go the route of playing with your physical product. I think that's important. I think it's fun. It's what I would want if I was getting a game and there was a competitive league starting up virtually. So we're going to try that. I think it's going to work. You never know, but I think it's going to work, and that's how we're going to do that. So, yeah, someone said, not to steal Bradley's thunder, but all their online leagues plan to use webcams. That is correct. What is the most amount of man hours spent on a single rulebook line? Like on a single sentence? Shit. There were some... So Testament is probably our most complicated game from a rulebook standpoint, from rulebook writing. I'm thinking here. So there were times in Testament's development where I or the other editor, the primary editor, I was sort of a backup editor and more did kind of proofreading stuff for Testament, but I was still involved in that editing process, where we would agonize over certain lines. There are so many ways to, I hate this phrase, but there are a lot of ways to skin the cat, right? And when it comes to rulebook writing, you can say the same thing in a multitude of different ways. So there would be times when the primary editor and I would go back and forth yeah, but what if we said this? Or what if we change this word here? What if we rearrange the words here? Or what if we take this section or this sentence and we put it at the end of the paragraph instead of in the middle or at the beginning? So you don't really think about how much goes into the text of anything that you read, but especially a localized product. I think there's probably a misconception with localized products that, oh, it's just a translation thing. Like you just translate the language and boom, you're done. But that is not the case. Sometimes you rearrange the entire structure of a localized work that because it makes more sense for your new audience. And that is the hallmark of a good localized work. When someone, your new audience, in our case, our English audience, never realizes that they are engaging with a product that was not created in their language. If someone reads our product and says, "Oh yeah, I can tell this was translated work," we have failed as a localization studio and as a publisher. And so you really want to make sure that you get every single line right from a translation perspective, but then also when you're editing it so that it reads well for your new audience, in our case, for our English audience. And so man hours spent on a single line, I don't think I could give you a specific number there, but certainly there have been lines and definitely sections of rulebooks that have been a whip for months of the localization development process. Things that we star or sticky, whatever phrase you want to use there to come back to. And these are things that we'll come back to time and time again. Certain sections, certain lines that will be a talking point in like all of our team meetings for weeks or months on end. I mean, that's if you're going to produce good work in this field, that's what you have to do. This isn't, I will be honest, localization is not necessarily fun work. It's hard as fuck. It's time consuming. You can fuck it up so easily. And if everyone on your team isn't communicating with one another, and if you are not communicating well with the original creators, it's so easy to screw something up and to then produce or ship a bad product. Now, in other forms of media, let's say like video games, I mean, obviously you always want to make sure you're getting your product 100% right. But there's a safety net in video games. You can just issue a patch. Boom, done. Like, oh, there's a typo? Okay. We'll fix that in the update. Done. We don't get that luxury, right? So we really agonize over making sure our stuff is presented well. And so therefore this work, localization work, is not is on some days is horrible. It's there have been times in some rule books where I'll sit down and I'm doing some proofreading or on like Gun and Gun where I am directly involved in the whole process. And there are some days I sit down in front of the rule book and I'm just like, fuck, I don't want to do this. Like this is, I have to be in the zone, right? You have to be in the zone when you're in localization. And so it's hard. It's a lot of agonizing hours. Sometimes in localization, I will do 6 hours of research for one line. I mean, that's not like an exaggeration either. I wish it was. But there will be times when I have to go and look something up, and then that leads to looking something else up, and that leads to looking something else up, and it's like this endless rabbit hole. And I find like I just got lost in 4 to 6 hours of my day, all so that I could edit one line well. So that's the stuff that you deal with in localization. I mean, I love localization, I really do, but like it's hard. It's really hard. See, let's see what else we got going on in the chat here. Someone said I ordered the sleeves available with the pledge. Thank you, Sen. That's awesome. Okay, one more. What about custom mechs for the online league? And then someone also just followed it up and said, thanks for the answer and thanks for the tangent. I do that a lot, as you've seen. That's why these shows typically are slotted for like 45-minute shows, and then they turn into like double that, an hour and a half or so. Can you, Silent Frank, can you explain what you mean by custom mechs? Do you mean, okay, so in Embryo Machine, there are a couple ways to play, which is part of why the game is rad, and also why it's going to be a bit of a headache to run the league, but we're committed to doing it. So you can run Embryo Machine just using the mechs that come in the game, the pre-built mechs. These are mechs that come pre-built and come with pre-built decks. So that's one way that you can play. Another way that you can play is you use the pre-built mechs, which come with pre-established stats, but then you can customize the deck, so you don't have to use the pre-built deck with the pre-built mech. And then there's a third way, and that is you're building everything from the ground up. You're creating your own mech with its own stats and its own deck. So the way that we plan on doing it is two separate paths. We will have our custom mech league, and I think actually someone just mentioned this in the chat. I feel like they would need two separate leagues. Yeah, and that's exactly what's going to happen. We're going to have our pre-built league and our custom league. We're not going to fuck around much with the option of where you can use the pre-built mech, but then you customize the deck. Just because I think if you're someone who wants to customize your deck, you're probably someone who just wants to build your mech from the ground up. So we're going to do the full pre-built league and then your full custom league. And that's how we'll run it. The thing that I'm a little concerned about, not related to that, but still related to leagues and Embryo Machine, are the team leagues, because we are going to try to utilize webcams and physical products. I'm a little concerned about having, let's say, 2v2 matches. We're not going to get into like 2v2v2 or anything like that. It'll just be straight 2v2. I'm a little worried about the logistics behind having 4 people connecting through video. So it might be one of those things where we have to tinker and experiment a little bit with to see if it's viable. If it's not, we might go to Tabletop Simulator, or we might just kind of say, it's not worth it. Let's just focus on 1v1. I don't know what the demand is going to be for team matches. I mean, some people may say like, no, team matches, that's definitely like my thing. That's what I want to do. That's what I'm looking forward to. And if there's a ton of those people, then certainly we are going to meet that demand. I just feel like there's probably going to be a greater demand for 1v1 matches, especially in this COVID era. Now, once we get back to doing shit in person, I think there's probably more room and more demand for some team stuff, and that's exciting to me. I am someone who likes team endeavors. I like team sports. I like being a part of a team. I like working with someone else to overcome another team. I think there are plenty of people out there as well, and I think some of those people have probably backed Embryo Machine. So it's not like I'm against the team thing, but I think for the virtual league, it might work out better just one-on-one matches, but we'll see. We're going to give it a shot. We're going to give it the old college try, as they say. I'm just not convinced it's going to work smoothly. So we'll just have to see how it goes, and then we'll pivot, make changes wherever possible. The virtual league is a bit of an experiment in and of itself, at least with the utilizing physical components. I mean, we could just run a virtual league through TTS, and like that would be simple. But of course, I don't like to do things simply sometimes, and so we're gonna try the more challenging route. Though I think the more challenging route oftentimes is the more fulfilling route. So hopefully that's the case here as well. Yeah, no, Sen in the chat said Discord actually makes it super simple for 4 people to stream off a webcam. It does, and so that's why we're going to give it a shot. I mean, if I didn't think that it was possible, I would not be trying it at all. But I do think it's possible, and so therefore we're going to try it, see what happens. All right, so some other questions that we got throughout the week. Well, one was when will we get to see the solo mode? And again, my answer is when it's done. The next question is, have you given an example of what a deck looks like for an ultralight, heavy, and ultra heavy embryo yet? So this came from Discord, and we haven't. I'm thinking back. We haven't really we haven't shown off any custom decks at all. We haven't shown off like any of the decks that we've played with. We haven't shown off any of the decks that Mosaic has played with, or any of their folks have played with, and so we haven't shown off custom decks at all. That is on the agenda, though. I mean, there's a lot of time between right now, the middle to end of February and December of when games are going to start shipping out. So we've got a lot of time. I like to offer weekly updates. Certainly, there'll probably be a time when we move to every 2 weeks, but nevertheless, even every 2 weeks, it's still a lot of updates to be done between now and the end of the year. And so, because of that, I have sort of laid out what my update schedule is going to look like, at least for the next couple months. And we are going to be looking at some custom decks. Um, you've seen some of the pre-built decks in some of the mechs that we have shown off, in some of the mech boards that we've shown off, because on the mech boards essentially show what is in that mech's deck. So you've seen a little bit of that, but you haven't seen any customized decks, and you haven't seen any constructed decks. But you will soon, which will be cool. I would be interested to know what kind of mech deck people would be interested in seeing. Do you want to see a heavy deck? Do you want to see a light deck? Do you want to see something in between? Do you want to see an ultra light or an ultra heavy deck? There's a lot of different ways that we could go with this. So the decks in Embryo Machine are not, they're not huge decks. Most decks are 20 cards in total, but when you're constructing the deck from the ground up, you're really only constructing about 9 to 12 cards, because all of the other cards in that deck are cards that you have to put in your deck. They're aim cards, they're charge cards, they are movement cards, things that are already decided for you. And so that's something that I really, really, really love about Embryo Machine is, even if you want to get into like the nitty gritty and you want to construct your deck, it's not going to like consume your life. It's not like a Magic deck, I mean, there are plenty of games other than Magic, but I'm just thinking of Magic because I was playing earlier today, and I love Magic. But it's a lot more accessible than a lot of other games that offer deck construction. I love the fact that like you really only have to make 10 choices on what your deck is going to comprise in terms of weaponry. That's really appealing to me. All of our games, barring Testament, are very accessible games. And even Testament is accessible. It's not like Testament is this super dense game that only the most hardcore players are going to understand and therefore play. It's accessible too, but it's just all of our other stuff is way more accessible. It's more intuitive in that regard, and it's meant to be that way. I mean, Testament's meant to be a more involved game, and so therefore it's not as accessible as the games that are a little lighter. Nevertheless, most of our games are very accessible games, and that is the case with Embryo Machine. That's part of why I love it. I mean, even down to the gameplay itself. I mean, it's a very fast-moving game, and I'll talk about what we might be doing as a result of it being a fast-moving game here at the end of the talk today when I talk about our virtual leagues some more. So, next question. The campaign was a success. Does this mean we're getting the expansion somewhere down the line? I kind of talked about this last week, but since I haven't thrown that episode up yet on YouTube, I'll talk about it here a little bit. The success of a campaign is not necessarily determined by its Kickstarter success. Or I should say the success of a game isn't determined by the success of its Kickstarter. So the Kickstarter was a success. So that's part one of evaluating if you've got something worth further exploring with future expansions. Part two comes with late pledges and pre-orders. Do you get a lot of those? For instance, Wild Hunt Festival had a shit ton of late pledges and pre-orders. Part three of judging a campaign's success is, how does it perform at retail? Now, all of our games don't have a huge retail presence. We tend to have lower print runs than normal. I shouldn't say the normal, than a lot of the bigger publishers. Again, we're a niche publisher. And so we don't have huge print runs, which means we don't have a huge brick and mortar presence. Nevertheless, retailers still order our stuff, and we still reach out to certain retailers to gauge interest in if they want to carry our stuff. So part three won't be as weighted as parts 1 and 2, but certainly part 3 will be a part of evaluating the success of Embryo Machine. And when you put all 3 parts together, that's how you can determine if you've got something worth further expanding on. the good news with Embryo Machine is, the expansions already exist. It's not like a game that you're designing from the ground up where you then have to say, okay, yeah, I think this game has been a success enough to pursue, future content. And now we've got to hire new artists. We've got to get back to the designing drawing board. That costs, resources. It costs time. It costs money. The expansions of Embryo Machine are already finished. And so really it comes down to finding the right licensing deal with Mosaic, one that makes sense for them as much as it makes sense for us. And then, the resources that we would have to allocate to localizing and then printing those expansions. So I don't have an answer to that question right now because it's too early to tell. The campaign was a success, but will parts 2 and 3 that I just talked about, will they be a success? Harder to say. I hope so. I think so. But we won't really know that for a little while now. All right, I haven't been looking at the chat. Let me see if I missed anything. Someone said, I would prefer, and this is probably about the question the question I just answered before about showing off what certain decks look like. And they said, I would prefer to see you or somebody else present how and why it was built this way instead of the result. Okay. Yeah. So the process of why someone would make the decisions they made with regards to the cards they included in their deck. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I think we can make sure that we emphasize that in our conversations. Next question. Are you keeping the 2-letter codes of the Embryo machines on the Embryo Machine unit boards the same as the Japanese version, even though they don't correspond with the new text? So, for example, the character who we call Fornice, on their board, they have the initials HO. Or for Garu, there are the initials used LG for Lugaru in the original Japanese version. So we are changing those. In fact, we've already done that. We've already changed those initials on all of the boards to correspond with their localized names. So for instance, Fornice is now FO and not HO. Garu is now GA and not LG. I think there were one or two embryos where even with the localized name, because we didn't change the original names much, if at all, then those initials will stay the same. But for the most part, we did have to change more than half of the initials to reflect the new names. The second part of this question, for the mechs who got shortened names, is there a chance you may include the full name as a subtitle on the mech board while the shortened/localized names become the primary nickname? For example, Gario with Lugaru or Rugaru in smaller font beneath it, similar to Urage with Lumiere de Urage beneath it. Of course, ones like Fornice wouldn't need the subtitle. Or would you put the Japanese full name in katakana as a subtitle just for stylistic purposes? So no. I mean, it's a good question. It's a good thought. And I don't think it would look bad or anything like that. But why we're not doing it is there's already a lot of information on those boards. Like a lot. There's already a lot of text. There's a lot of numbers. There are a lot of effects. You're reading a lot, and I don't want to put any more text on those boards than need be, even if it's just like one word or two words. I don't necessarily want to do that, especially if you look at the top right corner of those unit boards. There's a lot of information being presented there. There is the mech's name, and then there's the little blurb, and it's typically 3 lines. That's a little bit like a quick summary of what kind of mech that is, along with some flavor text. So you've already got a lot of text up there in the top right corner, which is where you would probably want to put like a stylized nickname of some sort, even if it was in katakana. But I don't want to do that because I don't want to crowd up the board with more letters than is needed. And in this case, offering a nickname or a subtitle really wouldn't offer anything. It wouldn't make better the presentation of that card. In fact, I think it would just get in its way. And I don't want to do that. Now, if adding like Japanese characters or lettering added to the overall presentation and the aesthetic, I'm totally down with that, but it doesn't. In fact, a lot of our a lot of our logos, a lot of our game logos, and all of them actually, except Testament, include either the original Japanese name or the katakana. And most of the time, those logos did not include the original Japanese lettering. So, for instance, Embryo Machine, when it was released in Japan, was just called Embryo Machine, just all English lettering. We added the katakana to the gosh, I'm not looking at the logo now, either to the top right or the bottom right of the logo. Uh, we did the same thing with Wild Hunt Festival and Gun and Gun, and so we like to include Japanese lettering when possible, but typically only for like game logos. I don't like to clutter up boards or cards any more than necessary. And when you present dual languages on a card, oftentimes it can just confuse people. They're like, "What? I can't read that. Do I need to read that? Am I missing out on information there? Why did they even put that there?" It's that kind of thing. Now, with Gun and Gun, it was a little different because we made the conscious stylistic choice to include certain kanji on the cards, but that's because it actually added to the overall theming of the game. I don't think you'd really get that with Embryo Machine. I don't think it makes sense. It's a good question. Looking at the chat here, Silent Frank said, "Will Gun and Gun or Embryo Machine get any small updates on TTS?" Maybe. You should stay tuned for later this week. The next question here. Okay, so those are our Embryo Machine questions. I'm going to move to some more general LionWing questions here. Someone dropped this in the Discord. You mentioned in the last stream, actually, I think this was Sai, who is still with us in the stream, I think. You mentioned in the last stream that you wrote some game lore that we'll sadly never get to see. Is there some original work of yours that's available that we can enjoy and judge? I'm trying to think. There's some stuff out there. There's some of my writing is out there, not a ton. I mean, a lot of my like creative writing came when I was a localization editor. Like for instance, I was the lead editor on the Clannad visual novel Localization, and so pretty much all the prose you see in the main route of that game, as well as some side routes in that game, I wrote, and it was given to me as raw translation, and then I took it and had to turn it into English prose that were worth reading and that read well and were fun to read and all that good stuff. And so you could see a lot of like my styling in some of the video games that I was a localization editor on. I did a lot of localization editing for Aura Kingdom and some other MMORPGs like that. In terms of like creative writing, like stories and whatnot, that there's some stuff floating around out there. But nothing that I would really say like, oh, you should definitely go check out to see what it's like. I think you can actually probably get a better sense of what that writing style is like so that you can judge it, as you said, in the in both the Testament rulebook. So I wasn't the main editor on the rulebook, but I did do most of the main editing and localization editing, and therefore creative writing and prose on all of the narrative text in the Testament rulebook. However, you could probably get the best understanding of what that writing style looks like in the quest log of Wild Hunt Festival. So the quest log was given to us through pretty raw translation. I mean, the translation worked. I like it served its purpose, but it was very, very raw, and like not presentable at all in its original form. I mean, most of the time a translation is not presentable in its original form. You want someone to go through and you want them to edit it and spruce it up and all that. But this was like, especially raw. And so I pretty much had to rewrite all of those quest logs and all of the character backstories that you'll see in the character booklet from scratch, like from the ground up. I just took the essence of the translations that were given to me about all of that stuff, and then I just rewrote it entirely. So you'll be able to see that work there. I saw actually that someone, I didn't include this on my sheet because the question came in kind of late. Let me pull it up in the Discord. Someone asked a follow-up question actually to that question from Mirage Sessions. He said, to piggyback off of Sae, will we ever see that unused game lore anywhere else, like in a book or a blog series or something? I don't know. I would love to be able to. I would love to be able to do more with it, especially with the Testament lore, because that's that lore that I wrote so much of, and then like we never used it. I knew we weren't going to use it. There was no place to use it. I wrote it so that I could then better write the couple character biographies that were in the game. That being said, Testament is one of those games, and I know no one's played it yet because we're all still kind of waiting on it. Testament's one of those games that I would really, really like to revisit. In fact, a lot of our games I would like to revisit. I mean, I've made no bones about my love for Embryo Machine and the fact that I would love to localize and publish those expansions. I've made no bones about our commitment to localizing and publishing future Gun and Gun content. I haven't been as vocal, but I very much, very much, very much feel passionately about returning to the worlds of Wild Hunt Festival and Testament. So is there an opportunity then down the road for Testament specifically, since this is what that question was about, is there an opportunity down the road to maybe see that lore finally in some form? I mean, maybe. I think it would be cool if there was a way to incorporate it. Like I said, I had illustrated maps and everything. I mean, Kuro really likes he just makes the game, and I mean, if he likes you, he'll let you do whatever you want to his game, as long as you kind of like run it by him. And so I really kind of went wild with Testament, especially because it was the first game we worked on after Sinome Coliseum, and it was our first like big involved game. So I was really, 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 really into presenting that game in a very specific way. And Testament's localization happened at a time when our release schedule hadn't become as aggressive. And so for most of 2019, we were just working on Testament. Again, 2020 was when I kind of kicked things into high gear and really started taking LionWing seriously. But 2019, LionWing was still very much just like a side thing that I was doing in my spare time at night. And so only working on Testament all that time, I kind of just threw myself into its world. And yeah, the funny thing is like I threw myself into its world. I've got all this, I think it's interesting lore. It's probably some of the best world building that I've done. And no one sees it. So, what can you do? Let's see here. Someone said, Bradley, localization can be hell. It never ends. Also, Bradley, I really want to continue working on what I've already published. So I don't know what the M confirmed means at the end of that sentence, so you'll have to explain that part. Yes, so like I said, localization is hell, but I must love it because here I am. I mean, seriously, like localization it's my thing. It's been the thing that I've wanted to do ever since 1997, when I played my first Working Designs game on the Sega Saturn. I shared this in an interview that I did a long time ago. I don't think I've ever talked about it really in any official capacity outside of that, but I remember Working Designs is my favorite localization company. I credit them for getting me interested in localization. They were really big during the Sega CD or Mega Drive, Sega Saturn, and PS1 era. Had a little stint in the PS2 era with Growlancer and Sylphid, but nevertheless, they really got me into localization. But I remember I played my first Working Designs game on the Sega Saturn called Dragon Force, and I remember being so enamored with it. I was talking with my mother in the car. At the time I was like 13 years old, and I was like just gushing over this game and how cool it was. And I remember her saying, like, Bradley, like, you could do that. Like, you can do all the stuff that you like about this game is mostly like its writing and its story. Like, you could do that. That like people get paid to translate that text, and then make the text better. Like if you ever wanted to do that, that's a thing. Like that job exists in the world. And I remember, I mean, those weren't her exact words, but that's what I remember from 20 plus years ago. And from there, it was kind of like, oh, really? Okay. I never really even thought about how these words ended up getting onto this game that I'm then playing and reading. So that was kind of like that's when everything kind of started, my love of localization. So like, yes, localization is hell, but I guess I'm a bit of a masochist because it's a hell I love. Even on the days where I'm like, oh, I don't want to edit. I just love it. So another question here. I'm curious about the software side of publishing and translating. Is the Adobe suite the gold standard everywhere? Did you do some custom tooling? Yeah. Adobe is pretty much the go-to suite of software, at least in this line of work. I mean, we spend a lot of time in Illustrator. I mean, that's our primary program, but same with Photoshop. You spend a lot of time in Photoshop too. Illustrator tends to be more of the tends to be what you work in with game assets, and then Photoshop is where we do like a lot of our marketing ads and that kind of thing. So between those two, between Illustrator and Photoshop, you're pretty much set. I mean, there are times when you're going to work with InDesign and all of that, but it's certainly to a lesser degree, at least for the games that we're producing right now. And therefore, Illustrator and Photoshop are the ones that we utilize. Did we do some custom tooling? Not really. Trying to think back again. I did a little bit of the graphics work on Testament. A little bit of like the secondary graphics work on Testament. I don't remember any custom tooling though. I'd have to think about that more. I actually didn't see that part of the question until right now. I try not to look at any of the questions until I'm on the air, just because I think you get a better genuine answer when you're having to answer for the first time, or when you're looking at the question for the first time and having to answer on your feet. So I think those are all the questions that folks sent to us. Thank you everyone who sent those questions. It's always great to get questions. I just can't emphasize that enough. So thank you. Some other things to talk about. We've got more stuff to talk about. So we posted an update yesterday on Wild Hunt Festival. So some good news there is, if you didn't read the update, mass production's done on the game. Mass production has been done on the game for a while now, actually. What we were not aware of was that, or I guess I should actually leave that for Gun and Gun. I'm kind of mixing things there. But at this point with Wild Hunt Festival, we're just waiting on the games to be picked up, which sounds easier than it actually is. So the coordination of international freight shipping is, I don't know, it's always a bit of a clusterfuck, to be honest. And I think that's just the way that it is. I think you can have the best people on the job and it's still going to be a bit of a clusterfuck, just because so many people are trying to coordinate various things. So for instance, with international shipping, you've got 4 entities that you're trying to coordinate with. You've got the publisher, so you've got us. You've got the printing company, the manufacturer. You've got the freight company, and then you've got your fulfillment company. And every entity in that equation plays a part. And all entities in that equation, though, have to know what the other one is doing. And all entities have to be talking to one another. But then there are certain entities that need to be talking with other entities more than some of the other entities. And yet the entities that are being talked to less by that entity still need to know what that entity is doing. So you see why it's a clusterfuck. So it's a lot of emails, a lot of emails. Of course, then you're also trying to do all of this through email, and you've got time differences across the world. So, you've got your printing company in China, you've got your freight shipping company from God knows where. I mean, they could be coming from anywhere. You've got people in the States, but you've got people in different parts of the States. So there's a time difference there. So you're trying to coordinate all this over email, and you never get quick answers because you can't get quick answers. And invariably, because there are so many emails being traded back and forth, some entities don't see the emails of other entities. And so you then have to say, well, hold on a second, you just said this, but I think you may have missed when this entity said that because it conflicts with what you just said. Um, it's a mess, and it's never easy. I mean, it's part of just what happens. I mean, it's like it's a thing you have to deal with. There's no getting around it. You have to do it, even though it's not fun. So I say that the games are just waiting to be picked up, as if that's a trivial task to complete that can be done quickly and easily, and it cannot be done quickly and it cannot be done easily. But we have never been closer to those games being picked up. So I mentioned in the update that we hired someone just to handle the coordination of all of these entities. I've done this myself in the past, but with how many projects that LionWing has going on, it's not feasible any longer for me to be as involved in every step of the process like I have been. I There's not enough time in my day to do that any longer. So instead of fucking it up and making people wait even longer to get their games because we've already had, to delay to May, I said, no, we're getting this right the first time around. We're doing this thing. I'm gonna hire someone that this is all they do for me, and so that's what I did. I hired Petra, and it's been smooth sailing since she came on board, which is awesome. So that's where we're at with Wild Hunt Festival. I mean, things are good with Wild Hunt Festival. I mean, barring the fact that we missed our original delivery date, but that's sort of water under the bridge at this point. That from here on out, once a game makes it onto the cargo ship, then it's easy. Especially if you're hiring a fulfillment company to then, take care of things, pick it up from port, and then begin to disperse it out to backers. If you're doing all that stuff yourself, then it's definitely the nightmare's not over for you yet. But I mean, we're working with a fulfillment company, so once cargo gets on that ship, it's easy. It's easy from there. So that's exciting. That's really exciting. Again, we've never been closer to having Wild Hunt Festival in people's hands, and I can't wait to see people play. I hope people stream some of their playthroughs. I mean, since you can play solo if you want, if you're not around people to play co-op, I would love to see some solo streams. I would love to just see streams in general of that game. I mentioned last week that people are going to get like a double dose of LionWing games because Wild Hunt Festival and Gun and Gun are going to show up on people's doorsteps pretty close to one another. Totally forgetting that Testament also is going to be showing up pretty close to the arrivals of Wild Hunt Festival and Gun and Gun. So I sort of jokingly said last week that it's going to be like the summer of LionWing, but it's really going to be the summer of LionWing because I totally forgot about Testament. So my hope and my assumption is that people are going to have a lot of LionWing games at their table throughout the summer months, which is cool, which is really cool. I mean, I had not originally envisioned people getting 3 LionWing games within the span of a couple months of one another, but nevertheless, that's what's going to happen. So that's the update on Wild Hunt Festival. The Gun and Gun update. Yes, so I'm going to talk about this in tomorrow's update, but for those who took the time to tune in tonight, I'll give you a little taste of what's going on there. So the printer was out of the office longer than we had anticipated. We were led to believe that because of the Chinese New Year / Spring Festival, that our printer was going to pretty much be offline from the end of January through definitely through the first week of February, but then would probably be back the second week of February. So that's what we were led to believe. I don't think we were led to believe that in any malicious way. I think it was one of those things that was lost in translation, perhaps quite literally. And what has actually happened is that was true. That part of our printing company was going to be offline from the end of January through early February. But the part that was going to be offline for only those like 2 weeks were like the account managers, not the actual folks who handle the printing themselves. And so those folks actually are not getting back into the office until, well, some of them return to the office this week. Some won't return until next week. So this is inevitably set us back by a couple weeks because we need to get the physical proofs. Now, it set us back by a couple weeks, which isn't all that significant. I mean, any setback is, you never want any setback, but a week or two, okay, that's not so bad. Where the real slowdown can happen and typically happens is actually with the production proofs. That's been our slowdown with Testament. I mean, barring the pandemic shipping situation with everything, the slowdowns in our past projects with Testament have been during the production proofs and have also been with Wild Hunt Festival in the production proofs. You find a component that doesn't exactly look the way you thought it would look, it doesn't look the way you were told it would look, and then you've got to say, well, actually, this looks like trash. You got to change this. But it's not as easy as like, this looks like trash. You got to change it. Here's what I want. There's like a bunch of other shit that has to happen in that process too. You've then got to, in some cases, provide new files. You got to provide new references. They then have to go. They're not going to then send you another physical proof just because that would really slow things down. They're then at that point going to send you digital proofs. They're going to print the product and they're going to take pictures of it and they're going to send it to you through email. It all just takes time. It just takes time. There's no other way around it. If you want to ship a game that looks the way you want it to look, then sometimes it takes time to get it there. My hope is that that won't be the case with Gun and Gun. A lot of the, backer rewards and whatnot for Gun and Gun were pretty straightforward stuff. Foils, a storage box, sleeves. I mean, it's all pretty basic. It wasn't like with Wild Hunt Festival or Testament, where we ultimately ended up getting fucked over by the metal tokens that we were offering. And usually metal tokens are easy to produce, but with Testament, it was a weird shape. With Wild Hunt Festival, I didn't like the coloring. With Gun and Gun, the components are a lot more straightforward. So my hope is that we don't run into any production issues when I get the physical proofs, but you just never know. I mean, it's kind of the worst part of the entire process because you're just sort of crossing your fingers. Like, I hope this looks the way it needs to look. And sometimes that's just not the way it happens. Okay, so lastly, virtual leagues. So we're not ready to fully talk about virtual leagues just yet. And in fact, I'm going to be hopefully conscripting the help of some of you in the community about how we're going to present the virtual league. And I know there have been some folks in the past who have said, hey, I'll help out with the virtual league in whatever way possible. Like, do you need judges? Do you need whatever? And yeah, we're probably going to need some help in that regard to make this go off smoothly. We're probably going to need some help. And so we want the virtual leagues to feel meaningful. We want the virtual leagues to offer substance. We want people to look forward to this stuff. We want people to be excited, not just to play the game, but to play the game with other members of the community. And so I really want to make sure that the leagues are well organized. They offer good prizes. They play smoothly. And I want them to have a nice web portal. So I threw up a web portal for Gun and Gun. I mean, a while ago. We linked to it on the Gun and Gun campaign page. And it was really just like a proof of concept. Like, these are some of the things that we're going to be looking at when it comes to league standings. But I really want to go more in depth. I really want to track stats with our virtual leagues to the extent that we can. Some games will lend themselves better to stat tracking than others. And some games will inherently lend themselves better to just competitive play than others. But my hope is that with both Gun and Gun and Embryo Machine, despite the fact that they're two very different games, will be games that make sense and are presented well through a league system. Something that actually I had thought about But then someone really kind of brought it to the forefront of my mind, and that is, how do we make some of these leagues different? And someone mentioned we should do shoutcasting for Embryo Machine. And it was one of those things that, when I was thinking about the virtual league for Embryo Machine, it was one of those things where I thought, oh, it'd be great to be able to stream some of this stuff. I mean, obviously that's primarily what we're going to be doing with our webcam setup for the virtual leagues, but also it'd be great if we'd be able to offer something that a lot of other tabletop, leagues can't really offer, just because of the constraints of the natural game environment. Embryo Machine is one of those fast-paced games. It's one of those really exciting games because there's a level of um, excitement, and it's a really dynamic game that you don't necessarily see in just a traditional card game, because it does combine cards with movement, and because it does combine that with simultaneous action selection, and because the game is just a fast-paced fucking game. I think I think we could actually get away with something like shoutcasting. And there are some folks who in the Discord said, actually, I might be interested in helping with that. So the person who originally brought this up in the Discord said, like, I think we'd probably need like three folks to help out with this. So when I say that we're looking for help, when it comes to our virtual leagues, I really mean kind of like in any role. If you think that you could help propel the virtual league to the level that it needs to be propelled to, get in contact with me. If you've got an idea for it, if you say, hey, I've got experience, I've got experience doing this in the past, hit me up. Drop me a DM on Discord, drop us a DM on social, whatever the case may be. Just talk to me, and we'll see if we can figure out a way to get you involved. I really want this to be a virtual league that is community driven, that has community at its heart. And one of the ways to do that is to involve the community as directly as possible. And so, if you want to help out, if you want to be involved on our end of things and not only on the player side of things, get in touch and we can make it happen. As I mentioned, I'm not ready yet to talk exactly what the virtual league is going to look like for Gun and Gun, even though Gun and Gun is going to begin shipping, hopefully, in May. Probably not going to start looking at the virtual league commencing until later in the summer. I mean, not super late, but I do want to give folks at least like 4 weeks time to play the game before they jump into a league. So probably midsummer. I would say probably a month after games get into folks' hands, I would like to have the virtual league up and running. So there are a few games that have really fantastic league systems that I'm looking at as a means of influence for what our leagues are going to look like. Again, I really want our games that can offer leagues to have really robust leagues that keeps people wanting to play. I mean, I want people to play our games. They're good games. I want people to play them, and I want people to play them for as long as they want, for as long as possible, because I think they're that good at games. One of the ways to do that is, by offering a league that incentivizes folks to play. So I'm looking at various places. SkyTier they've just done such an awesome job with their league system and with their presentation of that league. I'm really looking at that. I love what Pop Geeks has done there. They've just knocked it out of the park. I want to be able to bring some of that panache to the LionWing stuff. So, and yeah, I think that's about it for tonight, folks. I think that covers everything. I've answered all the questions. I responded to all the comments that we've gotten. I appreciate you all spending your last hour to hour and a half with me as I go through LionWing news, and in some cases just kind of ramble. Thanks for jumping in to the chat. If you've been in the stream, thank you so much. I love when folks join live and ask questions and chat along with the show. Look for this in your podcast app of choice of the four that I mentioned before, as well as up on YouTube soon. And until next time, wow, someone joined. Someone has been watching the stream despite the fact that it's 4:30 a.m. You are awesome. I love you for that commitment. That's commitment. That's some serious commitment. That's more commitment than I would be willing to commit to anyone. So thank you. That's really rad. Now go sleep. Seriously, go sleep. And I will see you all next time, next Wednesday night, 9 p.m. EST here on Twitch. And until then, take care, folks.